let us talk about love. Last week we spoke about the theology and life of James Cone, one of the founders of Black liberation theology. One of the things I wanted to read last week was an article and an interview with Dr. Cone, who in his search for liberation theology that freed Black people from the systems of oppression created by white male European traditions, in seeking to embrace the blackness of his Christianity and the blackness of his theology, he came upon a stumbling block that he began to talk openly about. And it was the inclusion of LGBTQ people into the movement, into the Black community, into the Christian church. He called it a stumbling block, and it was a place where he needed his circle to be drawn wider. One of his students at the time was a young gay man who he said opened the door for him, showed him the way to find a new influence, to learn something from people, to be changed. That it was not just about saying, I'm affirming of queer folk. It was not just about welcoming people in, but it was also a willingness to be changed by that new dynamic when someone enters into that space. Cone lifts up that the greatest influence on his personal theology from his gay and lesbian trans friends was to connect the theology of his head with the theology of his body, to be in touch with his whole self. And he wrote this, what he learned. He said, the church that is so hostile to gays, it can't possibly be about love. Here you have body, spirit, all the dimensions of love at the center of a theology, at the center of a movement. And the church is rejecting it by rejecting queer people. Even though the church itself claims that love is at its center. What a contradiction, Cone writes. Focusing on love and reading about it in LGBTQ plus theology and experience helped me to love my body a lot more, helped me to see the connection between pleasure and God, the deeply sacred part of my being and of our interconnectedness in this society. It helps me to like myself as a bodily human being with all the pleasures and feelings that I have when I'm connected with another person. Cone's talking about here what we in the business refer to as incarnational theology. It is a theology that is lived in your body. It's the affirmation that it is good to be a human being, to have both a thinking brain, a pumping heart, all of the organs and muscles and bodies that contribute towards our human experience. I believe that the fundamental experience of life, not just for humans, but for all of life, is this orientation towards love. For those of us who are blessed with pets or animals, we know that animals love. We know that we love. We believe that God loves. To quote theologian Rob Bell, love is the engine of the universe. So friends, what is your definition of love? What is love? And here's the hard part for today. Who gave you that definition of love? And in what ways is it limited? As James Cone found, as I have found, sometimes those white male European traditions institute ideals as the norm of what things are and the way they ought to be expressed. I want to posit today that love, as some of us have learned about it, is supposed to fit in this little box. And maybe that's oppressive. And we don't often think of love that way. Many of us are familiar with the statistic about monogamous relationships, whether heterosexual, homosexual, other, that 50% of marriages end in divorce. That's a tough statistic for people who believe in love. for people who believe in commitment like I do. So what does that mean? Does that mean that 50% of married people are somehow sinful or not good at it? Does that mean that a system that we have here in this country especially is not set up to support people financially, spiritually, emotionally enough to sustain committed relationships? Does it mean that some humans are not meant to be one partnered? That last question, especially, is one I've been wrestling with for a year or two. Something I've been wrestling about since reading the Welcoming Congregation material that calls congregations to be intentionally inclusive, radically hospitable. Something I've been thinking about since taking our trans inclusion workshop here at Mount Airy, and recognizing that being welcoming and hospitable is not just about saying, yes, you can come into this space, we'll allow it. It's about that willingness to be changed and influenced, to be transformed by the human beings in front of you, to have the circle drawn wider. So I've been doing reading about the Welcoming Congregation. And there's a list of things that says, if you've preached on all of these, you're one step closer towards being an inclusive congregation. Do you preach about the history of the gay rights movement? Yes. Do you preach about lesbian theology? Yes. Do you preach about bisexual inclusion, transgender awareness? Yes, yes, yes. And then one caught my eye. Has your congregation ever preached on polyamory, non-monogamous relationships? And I literally had to stop and rub my head, because I have literally never thought about preaching about polyamory. It has never entered my mind. So I've been reading and listening and researching about folks who have more than one intimate partner, who have a non-monogamous, consensual adult relationship. And it's something that I have been struggling with, struggling to understand, struggling to accept, and definitely struggling to welcome. Like, I might say it was welcome, sure, but if I don't personally reconcile with how I feel about it, with the unease or the discomfort that I was experiencing from reading about this, I couldn't be welcoming. Not until I got over how I felt about the morality of a non-monogamous relationship, or the immorality of it in this case, right? But in trying to be open, in reading about James Cone and how he had this experience and impact, I tried to talk less and listen more. To be inclusive, to connect the dots between my theology of love and of God with the theology of bodies and humans. To put my theology in touch with the physical, with gender, that I think we do a wonderful job of, with love, which I think we do a wonderful job of, with sexuality, which I think we do a wonderful job of, and then this question of intimacy and relationship. I was raised in a conservative society, if you can't tell by my accent, if you're new here. And I was taught that marriage was between one man and one woman, right? The quote-unquote biblical definition. And so I used to have physical reactions to anything outside of the norm, to queer stuff on TV, to seeing gay actors in books, in real life, because all the people I knew at that time were in the closet. I didn't know anyone who was openly gay. West Texas is not the most welcoming place for our LGBTQ siblings. And we are worse off for it. So I needed help. I needed what I call the inbreaking of the Spirit to help me widen the circle. And it didn't happen until I was in college, until I got a presentation from a group of mostly white men, speaking to a group of mostly white men. And the idea behind the program was to reduce sexual assault on campus. I say those words, And if that's causing something in you, I want you to take a breath. I hear you. I got you. This was a program designed to prevent sexual assault from happening, and it was very effective. It was proven to reduce predatory behavior, to change behavior in college men, to make the world a safer place. And I remember hearing this presentation, and I was hearing a question about morality. Because you hear that and you say, well, yeah, it's wrong to hurt someone. Of course it's wrong to hurt someone. It's immoral to hurt someone. Absolutely. But, and there was always a but in these presentations. College men are thinking about, okay, I have been taught my entire life I'm supposed to engage intimately with someone of the opposite sex. Marriage is between one man and one woman. And the way you figure that out is by practicing, by dating people, by having relationships. And because it's college, there's a lot of freedom. There's always a but. Well, what if alcohol is involved? Well, what if this? Well, what if that? The basic idea, right, is totally understandable. We were seeing this through the prism of morality. Well, we know that is wrong, and I don't want to do that. So how do I not do that? How do I not get in trouble? How can I express my freedom so much up to that point, but not get in trouble? That's a question that young white male men rarely have to answer. And it's the power of that question and the switch that was made in this presentation that so much affected me and so much affected other people, my friends. Because the question of how can I not get in trouble is the wrong question. The question is not about the morality, the rightness, the wrongness. The question is, how can I show care and respect for the person in front of me? How am I changed and impacted by the person in front of me in an equal way? Switching the mindset of the mostly white European male audience from the society framework of morality, is it right or wrong, to the framework of how do I show respect and love, as a move from personal protection to community consent. Prior to college, I, a white European male, viewed gayness through a morality question. Like Steve said, it's a problem to be solved. Either I was supposed to condone it or not. Either God allowed it or didn't. To be associated with it or not. Is it right or wrong? The widening of the circle for me was the realization that getting caught in that trap of right or wrong is a limiting view of love. It's putting love into a tiny box. It's what we call a scarcity mindset. The fear that there's not enough. There's only so much to go around. Only so much love. Only so much freedom. Only so much money. Only so much power. Being a person in America comes with freedom for most of us. And oftentimes people fear that that freedom is being stifled or made scarce. So we say we want freedom to be abundant. But what I learned in the widening of the circle is that that freedom comes with great responsibility. Great abundance comes with greater commitment to love, greater commitment to care and respect, greater commitment to consent, and less commitment to holding on to power. And this is the same principle that was taught to us about how to have intimate relationships with partners in respectful and communicative ways. It's the same thing we talk about when we talk about non-monogamous relationships. I was caught in the morality trap of my discomfort with anything outside the norm, but especially polyamory most recently. And it's the wrong question. It's the limiting question. It's putting love in a box. As Steve said, love is not binary. It need not be. Because my discomfort was not really about what other people are doing. It was about my unease with not knowing, with feeling like I had less power or control, less understanding. I made the switch. Not about how, is this right or wrong? Will I get in trouble if I condone it or don't? How do I show care and respect for the people who are in front of me, regardless of their sexuality, expression, identity? How do I show consent, care, and respect? So the circle of concern was being drawn wider. And here's the kicker. In giving up my need for surety and power and control, feeling like I understood everything, I was liberated. Just like Dr. James Cone said I would be. Just as he was, in being impacted by people with different sexualities and theologies. That I am made more whole by seeing the fullness and wholeness of the humanity of others. I am made better for it. So somehow, this boy from West Texas has become a little bit more free by learning from something that was unequivocally labeled as sin by my society growing up. We say in my tradition, the Lord moves in mysterious ways. I had learned something about myself, from learning about polyamory, something I was uncomfortable with, something that made me feel unease. I was made more whole by being open to learning and being influenced. So let me be clear. I'm not coming out as polyamorous. I'm not calling for us to be a free love community in the ways of the old commune, because that has some drawbacks. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm not telling you not to do it. My job, as always, is not to convince you to believe what I believe, to be converted to anything. That is not what I'm here to do. My job is to let the Spirit move, to let it lead us towards love, towards beloved community. So I'm not polyamorous. But not because I think it's bad or wrong anymore. I'm monogamous because, honestly, anything else feels like too much work. I'm still working on how to be in one good relationship based on consent and care and respect, based on being vulnerable and open and communicative. And it is a ton of work. I'm not prepared for anything else. That's what a lot of folks who are polyamorous will say. It can be liberating, help expand the definition of love, and if it is not based on consent and care and respect, if there is a power imbalance, if it is not open and vulnerable, it leads to abuse, it leads to hurt. And it is a lot of work. So what I've learned the past year or so about my incarnational theology is that it's good to be human. That all genders are whole and holy. It doesn't matter who you love, only how you love, with care and respect. Love is the engine of the universe, and we need more love in the world. So if queer love, if non-monogamous relationships, if polyamory is how you do that, how you spread more love in the world, get after it. I'm working on not letting my view of love be limited by the white, male, European norms that started out as marriage between man and woman because of property ownership, rights, and transactions, has evolved to support a capitalist industrial society that privileges people in marriage relationships at the expense of anyone else who has a different expression of love. Friends, in this UU congregation, if the monogamous nuclear family is not your ideal, I hear you. I respect you, and you have taught me to widen the circle, and I thank you for that. The Spirit and research have also led me to share more learnings, not just about love with a capital L, and this is not just for polyamorous couples or for non-coupled people. This is for everyone. This is about human relationships, things that I've learned. First, that love is based on two things: proximity and intimacy. Proximity can be geographic or it can be emotional. And that emotional proximity, closeness, translates into intimacy. Not just physical intimacy, not just sleeping with someone, but sharing your life with someone, sharing your fears, your hopes, your dreams, having trust, communicating, bearing your soul, pushing back against the fear that you will not be accepted for who you are with your partner. That's love. It's physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's ethical. When it's based on an equality of power and not an imbalance. When it's based on consent and care and respect. That's where love leads. Second, more freedom. We love to talk about the individual search for truth and meaning here in Unitarian Universalism. We also talk about the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Hearing Steve talk about Dignity's promotion of gay and lesbian relationships in ethical and responsible ways reminded me of our fourth principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I love that, and I know that we can all learn from that. Third, if you find yourself asking the morality question, is it right or wrong, and getting stuck in that? I hear about UU-ism often. Well, you can believe whatever you want. What would keep you from doing something immoral? I used to think about polyamorous relationships. Well, you can just sleep with whoever you want. It doesn't matter what the other person thinks. How is that moral? If you feel that way, I get you. I hear you. And I'm offering my story to see if that circle can expand. Because it is not about the rightness or wrongness of what you believe in a UU setting. It's not about the rightness or wrongness of whom you sleep with. It is about the responsibility to show care and compassion. It is a responsibility to have an ethical and open communication style. Great freedom requires great trust. Great trust requires great proximity and intimacy. Great intimacy requires great responsibility to love. You can't just do whatever you want without concern for the other person. Because what we call that, where I come from, is sin. What I learned about sin growing up was so focused on the rightness and wrongness, it missed the bigger question. How do we treat the person in front of us? No matter what your relationship looks like, if it is not based in consent and compassion, communication and love, I don't know a better word for it, friends. When we talk about love and freedom, in UU congregations, we consider ourselves liberal and open. And we have a troubling record of ministerial misconduct, of people blurring the boundaries in relationships, and not exercising consent and care and respect. And the reason it's so damaging, for example, when a minister sleeps with a congregant, is not because they're forbidden to love. We're not like the Jedi of Star Wars, forbidden from having attachments. It's because of the power imbalance. It's because the sacred relationship of being a minister is one that should never be taken for granted. We are given respect and power, and it's easy to abuse that. So if you ever find yourself in a position in a different congregation where there is an imbalance of power in a relationship, that is a red flag for what I call sin. And we need to work against that, to call it out, to call people back into covenant. Because when it's about power, it's also about the rightness and wrongness of it. The better question is, how do we show consent and compassion and respect on an equal playing field? Friends, when I talk about my incarnational theology, it's the idea that your body is good. There's nothing sinful about your body. There's nothing wrong with your body, no matter what it looks like, how it acts. But how you treat others, that is our great responsibility, to love with a capital L. So friends, I am trying to get out of this scarcity mindset of white male European thinking and to make more love in the world. I invite you to that in whatever way you feel, follow your arrow, grounded in communication, trust, and respect, to widening the circle, a willingness to be changed by the welcome, inclusion, and transformation of the divine spirit of love that rests in all people. I invite you to join me on that journey. May it be so. Amen.